In Laboratory Reddit, today's story is...
My mother threw me out when I was 16 for having a boyfriend. Now she's demanding that I give my lake house to my pregnant sister. What they did next is unforgivable. I was barely 16 when my mother kicked me out of the house. It wasn't for using substances, or for stealing, or anything like that. No, it was simply for having a boyfriend. I still vividly remember the night she found out. She was furious, shouting about how I could not do this to the family, accusing me of being completely disrespectful. Trying to reason with her was impossible, because in her mind this represented the worst betrayal I could have ever committed. She packed a suitcase for me, placed it in my hands, and told me that I should start my life on my own, as apparently she considered me old enough. At that time my options were few. I temporarily stayed on a friend's sofa while I continued to attend school and started working in a cafe, until I finally got my own place. I worked double shifts, saved every penny I could, and eventually got a university degree. Those were years of constant struggle and sacrifice, but I managed to get ahead. By the time I was 28, I had a stable job and enough savings to buy something I had always dreamed of, a small vacation home by a lake. This property meant much more than just a building to me. It is not a mansion like the ones you see on TV, but rather something modest. But to spend the weekends there, sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee, is more than enough. I only go there looking for peace and quiet, and that's exactly what I find. I should point out that the way my younger sister, Liana, and I were raised and treated was remarkably different. When she became pregnant during her second year at university, Mom's reaction could not have been more different to the one she had with me, who only had a boyfriend. Her response was, "Poor Liana made a mistake, but she's just a child." Mom welcomed her home with open arms and dropped everything to help her. Liana's boyfriend, Danny, was not exactly a role model if you're looking for someone without ambitions. He didn't work, he lacked ambition, and he was content to live at Liana's and my mother's expense. However, Mom loved to brag about how they were going to get ahead and how that baby would make the family bigger and more loving. Loving is not exactly the word I would have chosen. Although I cut off contact with my mother, I still maintained some communication with my sister during this time. Until recent events. The call came on a Sunday morning while I was enjoying my coffee at the lake house. I think the only thing missing from that house is not having a signal to avoid receiving these kinds of calls. Liana and Danny were getting married and needed a place to live. And the purpose of the call was to ask me to give them a special wedding gift, my house by the lake, so they would have a place to settle down. She explained that they needed a boost and that my house would be perfect for raising the baby. According to my mother, who only knew about its existence but not what it was really like, the house would be ideal because the little one would grow up in contact with nature. Furthermore, they argued that they would not be able to rent a decent place since Danny was still looking for work, and my sister did not plan to work once the baby was born. Nor was she doing so at the time. I made it clear to her that the house was not for sale because I wasn't just going to give away a property like that, and the most sensible thing would be for my mother to buy a house for my sister. But she replied that she wasn't going to pay for it, but that it should be a gift exclusively from me, although if I wanted, she could be included as part of the gift, as something together. Generosity personified. I explained that I had worked hard to acquire it and that it had great sentimental value for me. My mother not only wanted me to give a house as a gift, but she also asked me if I thought it would be okay if she were also part of the gift. At least she gave me the option to decide on that aspect. I replied that I would probably buy them a coffee maker or something similar as a wedding gift, but that I definitely wouldn't buy them a house. Besides, I reminded her that no one had given me a house when she threw me out when I was 16. Her response was that my situation was different because I had caused it myself. She said that our differences shouldn't affect Liana, as it wasn't her fault that I had been irresponsible as a teenager. But I never tried to blame Liana. It was always my mother's responsibility. And it didn't matter that I was a teenager then. I only had one boyfriend, while she, as an adult, got pregnant by someone who couldn't even pay rent. At the end of the call, Mom was shouting, saying that I hadn't learned any lessons in all this time. She hung up, but not before telling me that she hoped I would reconsider my decision. I assured her that I wouldn't. The worst part was starting to receive messages from Liana. By then, my mother had already completely influenced her, and she expected me to just hand over my house to her. Danny also intervened, sending a long message about how he had always admired me and wanted to follow in my footsteps, but they needed this opportunity to get started. I replied that they were building the house from the roof down, as they should have got jobs first and then planned a baby, but I wouldn't be the one to resolve this whole situation. I wouldn't become responsible for their problems. My mother also sent a rather long message, which must have taken a long time to write, as it was perfectly written. It said that if she had a holiday home, she would hand it over without hesitation, but unfortunately she did not have the same kind of upbringing as me and had not achieved as much success. So my mother not only justified throwing me out of the house when I was 16, but also took credit for all my achievements. I didn't reply, because she knows perfectly well that nothing I have achieved in my life is thanks to her, but in spite of her. Because if she really believed what she says, she should turn my house by the lake into a psychiatric center and lock herself up there. Now I know that someone will be left without their coffee machine, because my house is out of the question, and any other kind of wedding gift too. Update 1. I thought the calls and messages were unpleasant, but they were nothing compared to what happened next. They have tried to take things to another level, and they have succeeded, although I'm not sure it was a good strategy for them. I had finished a tiring day at work. I was looking forward to going to the lake house for the weekend and relaxing, as all this drama with Mom and Liana had left me exhausted, when I received a notification on my phone. It was an alert from my home security app, informing me that motion had been detected on the property. I opened the live stream, and there were people there who shouldn't have been. Liana and Danny were on my porch, fiddling with the door. Incredibly, Danny was holding a crowbar, trying to force the lock, while Liana stood behind him, looking nervously around. I was forced to call the local police, even though it was my sister and brother-in-law. I explained the situation and asked them to send someone immediately. The operator assured me that the officers were already on their way, but those minutes of waiting seemed eternal as I watched them through the camera. I don't have any valuables there, but I'm one of those people who don't like their belongings to be touched. Perhaps it's a consequence of my traumatic experience as a young person. I could faintly hear their voices through the transmission. Liana was rushing Danny, warning him that someone might see them. Danny shouted at her, saying it was her fault they had to do this because she hadn't managed to convince me to hand over the house to them. When the officers arrived, Liana and Danny panicked. They tried to run away, but it was too late. The officers arrested them and interrogated them right there on the porch. I could hear Liana sobbing, telling the cops that it had all been a misunderstanding and that she thought she had permission to be there. I gave them access to the security footage, which clearly showed Danny trying to break in. They eventually arrested him for attempted burglary, and Liana as an accomplice. The next day, Mom called me in a rage. She said she had completely overreacted by involving the police, that she hadn't considered the consequences because they couldn't go to prison, they were practically children. I replied that children shouldn't have children or enter other people's property without permission. And if they were children to her, all their actions should be punished with Mom's special punishment, like the one she applied to me. I pointed out to her that it wasn't right for her to make excuses for her daughter, that she should teach her a lesson, and in a few years, see how she bought her own house by the lake. She told me that she was my mother, and as such she was ordering me to withdraw the complaint and help my pregnant sister, my future nephew, and my brother-in-law to get out of there, or else. I asked her, or else what? But the conversation ended again with my mother hanging up. I had already gotten used to that. Update 2. Here I tell you the consequences of the attempted break-in. Liana stopped calling and sending messages, which is a positive thing, but Mom stepped up her efforts. She started calling me daily, leaving voicemails insisting that I settle this whole matter. At one point, she even showed up at my apartment unannounced. When I opened the door, she immediately started pleading and demanding, both at the same time. She said that Liana was devastated after being released on bail, while Danny felt humiliated, and that I was the only one who could fix the situation. She begged me to drop the charges against Danny and Liana and give them the house. I replied that these feelings they were experiencing were normal, as long as you were a person who had committed a crime. I assured her that I was not going to drop any charges, and that the house would remain mine until I decided to sell it, but that the key word here was sell it, not give it away, and even less so to my family. It was then that he used a supposedly definitive argument. He said that if I didn't do this for Liana, I would regret it for the rest of my life. He said that the family was all we had, and that one day I would be sitting in my damn lake house, regretting having lost my family. I replied that the only thing I would regret when I was on my porch would be not having also cut off the relationship with my sister, because all this was giving me headaches. I asked her if she had ever regretted throwing me out of a house when I was 16, because it certainly didn't seem like it. She started to stutter. I told Mom that family relationships should be reciprocal and that I wasn't going to sacrifice myself for people who had never been there for me. He looked at me as if I had slapped him. Without saying another word, he turned and left, much like how our calls ended. That same night, I received a message from Liana. It was brief and to the point. "You have ruined my life." I wasn't going to reply. I knew it wouldn't be worth it. But in the end, I gave in to temptation and replied, "You are ruining the child's life. Consider putting it up for adoption." At least my last weekend at the lake house has helped me cope with all this drama. Not only do I refuse to give her as a gift to my sister because it's absurd, but she is also a source of therapeutic healing for me. I could never part with her. Update 3. My mother and Liana seem like real illusionists because they always have an ace up their sleeve, something I never anticipated. I thought the attempted break-in and Mom's dramatic visit had been the culmination of this disaster, but I was wrong. It all started with a series of posts on social media. Liana played the role of victim perfectly in this whole situation. She wrote about how I was hoarding a vacation home while there are homeless people, like her, a mother-to-be about to give birth. She conveniently omitted the part about the attempted break-in, her arrest, and how Mom had bailed her out. Also the part where I had worked hard to acquire this house, while she simply expected everything to be handed to her effortlessly. The post included a photograph of her with teary eyes, standing in front of a small apartment. The reactions were mixed. Some people, mainly mutual acquaintances, criticized her for demanding property without working for it, but there were others who seemed to expect me to hand over my house to her as a way of redistributing wealth. None of these commentators seemed to care about the creation of wealth, only its distribution from those who work to those who don't. No wonder the idea of redistributing wealth is so appealing. No one seems to care that I live in a small apartment in the city so that I can have a house to escape to at the weekends. Some think I'm some kind of billionaire who travels to her lakeside mansion by helicopter, laughing at the less fortunate from on high. Initially, I ignored it. The people who knew the truth weren't buying it, and those who didn't know weren't my problem. But then Liana crossed a line. She posted a photograph of my lake house with a caption that read something like, "This is the house my selfish sister is keeping all to herself while I struggle to keep a roof over my head." The image was clearly taken just before they were arrested. The comments multiplied. People began to speculate about the exact location of the house and its value. Some even joked about showing up there themselves to occupy it on Liana's behalf. I wasn't going to sit back and do nothing about this. I contacted a lawyer to find out what my options were. He advised me to apply for a restraining order against Liana and Danny, citing the attempted break-in and the social media harassment. He also suggested sending a cease and desist letter to force Liana to remove the posts. The restraining order was quickly granted, given the evidence I had, but the damage was already done. Privacy is fundamental to me, and it's part of the reason why I value the lake house so much. If you spend a lot of time in the city, you feel like privacy is a scarce commodity. But there, in the middle of nature, with neighbors at a considerable distance, you regain some of it. After the restraining order was issued, Liana finally stopped posting about me on the internet, but that didn't mean the drama was over. Instead, Mom decided to take matters into her own hands. She showed up at my lake house one Saturday morning without warning. I was outside looking after the garden when I heard her car approaching. I hadn't invited her, and I certainly didn't want to deal with her, but I knew that ignoring her would only make the situation worse. Mom didn't waste time getting to the point. She said she was there to make me see sense because, in her words, I had destroyed my relationship with Liana and ruined the family just because of past resentments I couldn't get over. I explained that those past experiences made it impossible for me to connect with her emotionally. Mom dismissed it as if it were unimportant. She claimed that Liana was just desperate and didn't know what else to do. She said I should understand because, after all, I had also been young and reckless at one time. I replied that there was a big difference between being young and making mistakes and being an adult and refusing to take responsibility for your actions. I didn't get half as much support when I was younger than Liana, and for something much less serious than what was happening now. The conversation ended again when my mother became enraged and turned to get into the car. Unfortunately, the restraining order did not include my mother, otherwise she would have been arrested too. Update 4. I have decided to share my story on social media to make the truth clear to anyone listening to my mother or my sister. I took a deep breath and started to write, setting out everything that had happened as clearly and honestly as possible. I had to go back a long way because the post began just at the moment when I was thrown out of the house at the age of 16 for the crime of having a boyfriend. The story continued with all the sacrifices I had to make until I reached the point of buying a house by the lake. Years and years working even at weekends to achieve something like that. Then I focused on Liana. I explained how neither she nor her fiancé were willing to sacrifice themselves to work and expected everything to be handed to them without effort. And I wasn't going to hide anything that had happened recently, including her attempt to break into my vacation home. To make it absolutely clear, I added that the lake house was mine and mine alone, bought with my money. I wrote that I had no obligation, legal, moral, or otherwise, to hand it over to anyone, especially people with that attitude. I reread the post 3 times before pressing the publish button. It was direct but not cruel, objective but not devoid of emotion. I wasn't looking to generate pity, I just wanted to set the record straight. There were many people, known and unknown, who commented that my family seemed like a bunch of manipulators. Of course, not everyone supported me. There were still the unconditional defenders of my sister and my mother. The difference is that now they didn't speak out publicly, but through private messages. I warned them that if they didn't shut up, I would publish the messages they had sent me. That left them without arguments. Liana was the first to react, possibly because she spends all day glued to her phone. The only time I didn't see her with the device in her hand must have been the day she tried to break into my house. And yes, she was furious, which I had already anticipated. Her main concern was the future. I asked her, what future? My mother at least just wanted me to delete the post. I replied that the post only existed because they had been continually provoking me. If they hadn't acted the way they did, no one would have found out about their inappropriate behavior. I also warned them that if they attacked me again, my next response would be even stronger. Later that night, I received a call from a mutual friend who had seen the post. She informed me that Liana and Danny were in a panic, with Danny threatening to sue me for defamation. It was quite comical because of the absurdity of the situation. Everything I had written was true, and I had the screenshots to prove it. But besides, with what money was she planning to sue me? They should save that money to solve their break-in problem. They would certainly need it. Update 5. The other night Liana called me very late, crying. And they weren't fake tears. She was really sobbing. Danny had left her. He had packed his bags and left, blaming her for everything. He had told her she was toxic and that he couldn't stand her anymore. It seems that Danny doesn't have a mirror at home. My sister felt scared and alone and doubted that she could raise a child on her own. And now she was calling her sister for help after all the damage she had caused her. I would like to say that this is exceptional, but I constantly come across people in my life who feel they have a sense of privilege, who treat you horribly, and then ask for your help. I told her she had no one to blame but herself. She had decided to bring a baby into the world without any plan, without considering the consequences, and with a man who was clearly incapable of assuming basic responsibilities. It wasn't as if once they were married he would magically transform into a reliable and hardworking person. I reminded her that she had spent weeks attacking me, and now she had no right to ask me for help of any kind. I told her I would give her some advice, and that was to start looking for a job and to sue Danny for child support. Advice she didn't deserve. And do you know what she replied to all this? That I was evil, and she accused me of being insensitive. She said she didn't understand how difficult her life was and how much pressure she was under. I replied that I understood perfectly how difficult life could be because I had experienced it personally. That when I was 16 I had nothing, and I was thrown out of the house, so she could do exactly the same as me, since she was starting from a much more favorable situation than mine. I told her, you can choose to grow up, or you can choose to continue behaving like a spoiled person, but I now choose to enforce the restraining order because it also includes telephone contact, and it is not the first time you have broken it. And that's what I did to her. I'm sorry she was going through a bad time because her fiancé abandoned her, but she had already had too many chances. Update 6. As I promised my sister, I was going to enforce the restraining order this time, and so I did. I know this will bring more consequences for her, because in addition to trying to break into my house, she continues to do everything she shouldn't. But I have been very tolerant with her, excessively so, and it is time for her to face some consequences, even if she is pregnant. My mother did not like this, because it led to a new arrest, and she had to pay a fine for her release. In addition, new pages have now been added to the file of the pending trial for trying to break into my house. Money that, by the way, is coming out of my mother's pocket. I'm not sure if I enjoy causing my sister this, even if she deserves it. But that last part, making my mother suffer financially, I must admit that it does give me a certain satisfaction. At least things are calming down, as they must have realized that I'm not going to give in to them. I won't hand over my house to them, and if they continue to bother me, I will probably continue to cause them legal problems. They'd better understand this soon, because it's not helping anyone if they keep insisting, and they are getting more and more harmed. Update 7. My sister is causing more problems for my mother, and I'm not just talking about the breaking and entering trial. I should mention that in recent months my sister's lawyer has tried to negotiate with us to reach an agreement. She offered to pay $2,000 for some damage to the door if we agreed to drop the lawsuit. Some may call me petty, spiteful, or something similar for not accepting that $2,000. But the door has already been repaired, the money will have to be paid anyway, and I hope she faces some other penalty, such as a fine or imprisonment for this. I know that my sister does not have the resources to pay for any of this, not even to the lawyer, but my mother does. However, these are not the only problems my sister has faced recently. As well as being about to give birth, she has also caused new legal situations. In addition to the child support lawsuit, she has also physically assaulted Danny. My sister is applying for provisional child support until the baby is born. But Danny is disputing this because he is demanding a paternity test before he gives her any money. In order to get a lawyer and fight for this, he has got a job. So apparently it was just a question of motivation with Danny. The violent incident occurred when my sister tried to reason with him to get him to provide her with money now that he had a job, but he refused. I don't know what Danny's current living situation is like, but there was a wooden board that my sister, who was 7 months pregnant at the time, used to hit him on the head. A new arrest, a new court case, and more expenses. I know this because my mother has called to beg me to withdraw some lawsuit because she is running out of financial resources. My sister hasn't even bothered to contact me. She knows the consequences that this would have. I told my mother that I could consider it if we reached an agreement, which immediately caught her attention. I told her that I wanted to buy a second holiday home but on the beach, obviously in jest, although I didn't make that clear. When she asked me how I thought she could afford something like that, I suggested she take out a mortgage on her house. But she confessed that she had already resorted to that option to cover my sister's expenses. I told her that she should have thrown out the daughter who was difficult to support, instead of doing so with the one who now owns a vacation home, one that she could be enjoying right now. She replied that she could not abandon her daughter at this very difficult time. Did I correct her? No. I told her that this is not what she should do now. It is what she should have done a long time ago. Update 8. I think this will be my last update. A summary of everything I have experienced recently. I will start with my sister's trial for breaking and entering, simply because I prefer to start there. As I mentioned, she has had to pay for the repair of the door and has received a kind of probation, in which she must avoid committing another crime, or else she could end up in prison and with a large fine. He currently lives with my mother, in a rented house, because my mother had to sell hers in order to support herself, pay off her debts, and also support my sister and her newborn. My sister's daughter is indeed Danny's daughter, but he reached an agreement in which he would only pay half of the child support that my sister was requesting if he dropped the charges for the assault with the wooden board. And as far as I know, Danny is not exactly a present father, which is really surprising that I can't believe how absurd the situation of my sister and my mother is, because if they hadn't felt entitled to my property, today my sister would be married and my mother would still have her house. But instead they have made a complete mess of their lives by creating unnecessary problems. It has been really satisfying to put them in their place.